Good afternoon. We're going to be starting in just a couple of minutes. We've got just a couple of technical issues we need to work through. So I do apologize, but we'll be starting in just about 2 to 3 minutes.
Hey, LaShawn, I can't hear you.
Well, we haven't started yet. I apologize, Mary Hazel. We've got just a couple of technical issues.
That's fine. I saw your mouth moving. I wanted to make sure.
I was talking to Cherry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, good afternoon to everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I do apologize for the delay. We had just a couple of technical difficulties, and I would have to say it's not a Zoom meeting if you don't have at least one. Um, so thank you for your patience. All right, so we're going to begin with our welcome, and we've got our committee chairperson, Mr. Beaulieu.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. It's good to see everybody again. I know it's been a hectic few months, and that's why we're back here. As most of you know by now, the legislature has really changed some things, and it's forced us to come back together as a committee to try to figure out how we can re-engage our students when they come back to us. What is the best way forward? And it's really going to be a challenge. It's going to be a different looking calendar than anything that we had anticipated last year. But I know that, as we go forward, we can make this happen. I really appreciate everybody giving of their time. It's going to be a very different looking year. It's already been a different year in 2020, and we can expect more of the same going forward. So I'll let Dr. Smith talk about some of our goals, and we'll take it from there.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bowyer. What I'd like for us to do at this point are just real quick introductions. If you could give your name, your department or your school, and the group that you represent so that we know who's present as a part of the meeting. I know that the majority of us know each other, and we've been together for a little while as a calendar committee, but we do have some new members of our committee. So if we could start with our if you'd open up your participant list, and we'll just start with the participant list and just go down the list. I'm first, and then Cherry, followed by Anita. If you see that list, so just open up the participant list, and that'll kind of keep us from introducing ourselves on top of each other. So again, as I'm sure all of you know, LaShawn Smith, I facilitate the committee for the district, deputy superintendent.
I'm Cherry Smith, Administrative Assistant for Dr. LaShawn Smith.
Alan Bryant, Director of Secondary Education.
Patty Williams, Director of Special Education and Related Services.
Where's that?
Sharon Ducharme, Principal Laney High School, representing the traditional high schools.
Heather Byers, Eaton Elementary, representing the year-round schools.
I'm Deanna Lee, Principal of Carolina Beach Elementary, representing traditional elementary schools on the southern region of the county.
Jackie Jethro, Director of Elementary Education and Federal Programs, representing those two groups.
Elizabeth Murray, Director of Testing and Accountability.
Martha Banderas with the lead for the English as Second Language Department.
Edith Skipper, I'm principal at CTech High School.
Rachel Manning, principal of Isaacville Early College.
Rachel Manning, principal of Sites Academy, representing Restart Schools.
Eddie Anderson, Assistant Superintendent for Operations.
Julie Farnham, Assistant Superintendent for Student Support.
Jeannie Dubendorf, Payroll Supervisor.
Charlie Broadfoot, Principal at Roland Grice Middle School and representing traditional middle schools.
Christiane May, Principal at Howe Pre-K, representing Howe Pre-K centers.
Dawn Brinson, Assistant Superintendent for Technology and Digital Learning.
Maria Black, Lead Parent Liaison and Hispanic Services.
Ann Gibson, Chief Communications Officer, Public Relations Department.
Dale Burns, Interim Superintendent.
Anthony Manzo, Interim Director of Human Resources.
Glenn Locklear, Principal, J.C. Rose Center.
Debbie Stout, Principal at Lake Forest Academy.
And I think that might be everyone. And yeah, I apologize. I know that didn't go quite as well as maybe we wanted it to when the name started shifting. But I'm sure it could have been a lot worse. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge who's in the room, the voices that are in this space today, because this is very important work, and we want to make sure that all folks are represented. Now, I did not hear anyone who's representing our parent groups or the NCAE. And so we will reach out to our Council of PTAs and the NCAE again to make sure that they are part of this and engaged in this process as well. And so again, I thank everyone for taking the time to be a part of this conversation today. And so now we'll have Mr. Bowyer talk about the purpose of the committee, and then I will talk a little bit about the purpose of today's meeting.
All right, thank you, Dr. Smith. So what are we doing back here? As you know, like we said, there have been some changes, and the committee has several objectives that I think we should focus on moving forward. First, bring forth a recommendation to the board for the 2020-2021 calendar no later than July 7th. I really feel like we need to move as quickly as possible to make sure that our community knows when school starts. The date has been set, August 17th. What's not quite set is how we're going to add the rest of the mandated increased instruction days into our calendar. And we need to figure that out and figure out the best and most effective way to do that. Develop calendars that are in compliance with current calendar law. So the changes brought forth are only for the, I have gotten confirmation on that, they're only for the 2020-2021 school year, but they are significantly different, and we need to figure out how to put the puzzle pieces into place. Engage stakeholders in the development of our district calendars. That's why there's 78 people here, a who's who of New Hanover County Schools. And this is the most important objective for me, and I know for you as well. Develop calendars that are responsive to the educational needs of our students. They have been, like we all have been, through a whirlwind, and getting them back in front of their teachers, back with their friends is going to be a challenge in and of itself. How we do this precisely it's always important. It's critical this year to get this right and to move forward. And I'd also like to develop a working calendar for 2021, 2022. I think it's a sign to the community that we're looking past this craziness, and we're going to get back to some stability, some semblance of normalcy, whatever the new normal looks like. And Dr. Smith and I have discussed different options for 2021, 22, things that could really help us as a school district moving forward. And I think we can look at that simultaneously and in conjunction with this new calendar. So Dr. Smith, if you want to talk about the purpose of today's meeting specifically and where we go from here.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Bowyer. And we do have our parent representative. It may be that she does not have a microphone, but Kim Baddock is our parent representative. And we appreciate you very much that you being here. And we also have Shannon Smiles, who does not have her microphone, who is our director of early childhood education. So she's here to support in that area as well. So the purpose of today's meeting, I believe, is to review current legislation and determine factual legislative requirements, restrictions, limitations. I joked with Mr. Bowyer a little earlier today. I did not want to use the word flexibility because I don't necessarily see a lot of flexibility, but we do want to make sure that we're getting it right in terms of what the intent and the letter of the law is regarding new calendar legislation. So we want to talk about what the requirements are, what the restrictions and the limitations are. And then for this meeting, because we want to move in a very intentional way, um, in regards to this meeting, we want to also determine what questions we need to answer. So what questions do we need to ask and what questions do we need to have the answers to? And we're very fortunate that we will actually have a representative, Deborah Stagner from Tharrington Smith, who will be joining the call probably fairly soon. And so she will be able to provide us with some legal guidance in regards to this legislation. And then the last part of the meeting, I'd like for us to engage in a conversation in terms of what are our most immediate next steps. So what are the next steps to bring this forward? Because as Mr. Bowyer said, it's going to be very important to engage our stakeholders in the development of this calendar. We have to ensure that we're in compliance with the law, and we need to ensure that the calendar that we develop is responsive to the needs of the young people and the families that we serve. So making sure that we address what those most immediate next steps are in terms of moving this forward. So at this point, any questions, discussion, anything that you think that we've missed that we need to add to this, would love to entertain that now. Okay, so if not, then what we'll do is transition to what we have in terms of guidance from the legislation. And I've attached two documents at the top that you can click on and view in its entirety. One is the actual Senate bill, the final draft, the actual, not the abbreviation, but the actual. And then also I have attached, in case there's a need for that to be a part of the discussion, our traditional school calendar. And so in the legislation, it says very clearly that 190 days are to be a part of the instructional calendar for students. For folks who've been a part of the calendar committee before, you know that we are limited to the, and definitely Ms. Dubendorf and Mary Hazel, please chime in so that we get the language right. The contract day for teachers is 215. So though we will have 190 days for students scheduled, we cannot exceed 250 days in terms of our calendar for teachers. So that means that all the work days, all the annual leave days, as well as the holidays have to occur within that 215 scheduled days on the calendar. And so the 215-day contract or scheduled calendar for teachers is not new. This is consistent across all of our calendars, our early colleges, our year rounds, and in our traditional as well. New in the legislation, however, is that the first 5 instructional days of any calendar, except those exempted, may not be remote. So, new in the legislation, it is requiring that the first 5 days of the calendar that we develop um, may not be remote days. It's also requiring that 5 of the remaining 185 days be remote days in compliance with the required plan. So that means we're going to have a calendar of 190 days. 10 of those days will be designated as remote learning days for students. 5 of the remote days may replace work days or be classified as both a work day and an instructional day. Now, this, of course, is very new to us. We've not had this a part of any calendar legislation before. And what this means is that teachers would be allowed to take leave on these days. So it would be considered both a teacher work day and also counted as an instructional day. Sorry. Additional 5 remote days or dates could be added for any declared emergency or disaster of 5 or more days. And then the opening date for students would be August 17th. That's very clear in the legislation. So our schools would have a start date for students, not for teachers, but for students of August 17th. The closing date for students would be no later than June 11th. And we're, of course, very used to having that very definitive end date where the calendar cannot exceed beyond a certain date. And then also in the legislation, it clearly states that no remote instruction days may be scheduled prior to August 24th. And then I think a question that we're going to have to answer for ourselves is in regards to year-round calendars. And year-round calendars must meet one of the definitions above. So either our schools would be considered modified calendar schools, and you can see the requirements associated with the modified calendar, or
if we had any that met that 2003-4 requirement.
It's my understanding, Mary Hazel, that our schools would fall under, would be grandfathered by that, but I'd want to be able to do a little bit more research to be able to find authoritative source documentation to support that. But I do believe that our schools would meet that requirement just simply because of the number of years that they've been in operation. But I would need to do a little bit of research on that. And then the other option to be considered a year-round would be possibly letter B, which a plan providing students be scheduled to attend 45 days followed by 15 days of vacation repeated throughout the school year. And I think our schools are very close to that. And so I'd have to, again, do a little additional research to see if we would meet that requirement. But I think that's a question that we're going to have to answer as well. And so that represents the bulk of the changes in the legislation. And so at this time, I would ask for comments, question, discussion. Okay, and so Al has placed a question in the chat. And Al, if you've got a microphone, it might be helpful since we have so many folks, and I'm not sure if folks are very familiar about how to navigate chat just to ask that question. But of course, if folks don't have microphones, we're glad to take your discussion in the chat. But I'll read Al's question. Instead of 5 remote learning days or in addition to the 5 remote learning days, is it feasible to say that 5 to 10% of our calendar would be for remote learning? Example, a half day every week or every other week could be for remote learning. This would also allow for additional cleaning to occur. It might also put us in position to transition to remote learning if needed.
Al, if you don't mind, I'll address some of my concerns there. So having 5 remote learning days in a calendar law is curious in and of itself, but what I'm hearing out of Raleigh is an expectation of a major budget shortfall. As we all know, the biggest driver of every state budget in all 50 states is education. And so there's only so many places you can cut. And I'm really concerned that these days are placed in there so we can demonstrate, or in the hopes that we are able to demonstrate, a lack of need for continued expansion of brick and mortar schools. A reliance on IT and remote learning, I have a problem with it. I think it's problematic. I think we can do 5 days. Obviously, that's what the law says. But if we start to go away from that outside of a need, outside of a resurgence of COVID or something like that, I'm concerned that that could become permanent. And it really does, the way we've done it so far, we're not ready to make that transition, especially for our high-risk students. So that would be my concern with that.
So are you suggesting that the reason, because I've been reading through this the last few days and trying to wrap my head around the purpose. You're thinking it's budget that's driving this.
It might not be this year's budget, but I think there is going to be a push over the next several years to reduce funding by pushing K-12 public schools to more remote learning. I think that's definitely what the idea behind this 5 days is.
I guess I'm just, LaShawn, I'm just trying to wrap my head around the purpose.
So I think in another piece to this, and if you get a chance to take a look at the legislation, the total legislation, I think it's about 70 pages. But if you start on page 10, it and talking specifically about the Senate bill, it speaks to this calendar legislation, and it talks about remote instructional plans. And so as a part of a report in a plan that we have to develop to submit to DPI, State Board, Legislature, there are 13 points that we have to address. And so based on that, and I don't disagree with Mr. Bollier, but I think it may serve multiple purposes. But based on what I'm reading here, it really seems that this legislation is trying to encourage districts to prepare themselves to be able to transition very, very quickly to remote learning. So, I've heard folks even liken these remote learning days to practice days. So we're going to engage in the traditional instruction, but then throughout the year, we're going to transition to remote learning at these very intentional times and periods, so that if we find ourselves in the same or similar situation again, we're going to be able to do this so much more effectively because we will have trained and developed this very comprehensive plan in order to support a transition to remote learning. Um, so that is my take on it. And of course, I might be a little bit biased just simply because of my area instruction, but also understanding what and being familiar with what they're asking for as a part of this remote learning plan that has to be submitted to the state really drives my thinking around the fact that they're trying to prepare districts for this transition yet again.
Hey, Dr. Smith, that's kind of what I was trying to capture a little bit of. I'm just wondering, 5 days, scheduled throughout the year, does that really prepare us if we have to go forward? So that was really my thought process behind my suggestion was, would we be more prepared if we had this regularly as part of our practice? And, whether it's, once a week, every other week, once a month, but something a little bit more regular than just the 5 days that, quite honestly, when I read it, it looked like it could be on work days or other days. And I just think that if we have to transition back to something, it might be an easier transition if it's part of something that we practice on a regular basis, like we do with other procedural type things in the district. But that was kind of my premise behind that.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate you elaborating. And the other thing that I'll say about this is if we think about it, we still have hurricane season we have to prepare for. We still don't know if we're going to have a nice storm. So, these remote learning days would allow us the flexibility to pivot and respond to those issues without having to deal with makeup days. So I think we have to be very strategic in our design of our calendar. So a couple of comments in the chat box from Graham. Well, from Heather, Graham and I are concerned about year-round schedule with staff coming back to work full-time due to closed daycares, etc. Will we be ready to start July 1? And so again, this extension of the school year, the 190 days would be applicable to our schools, our year-round schools as well. They just would not be held to the start date and the end date, but the number of days that are required as a part of their calendar um, would be applicable to them. And Julie shared, agreeing with Heather and Graham, I would prefer we operate a more common calendar start for the year to support all students, staff, and our community reentry. And, going back to what Heather said, and I had not even thought about this. So it's not, again, New Hanover County just as an entity unto ourselves. We're going to need the support of our partners in providing child care for our teachers and after school care for our families. So I do believe that's something that we need to give some consideration to as well. And Patty, you had a comment, could possibly also support opportunities for professional development. Very much so, because one thing that we found out, in our transition, we provided teachers with about 5 days, 40 hours of really self-directed professional learning. This would allow us to be much, much more intentional on the front end in designing that professional development for our teachers. And Maria just chimed in terms of Mr. O'Brien's suggestion.
And Dr. Smith, if I could just interject too on behalf of elementary, if we're able to attend school face to face, that means that people are also able to go back to work. So I understand that we have these 5 remote days that are required by the law, but just something to keep in mind in terms of adding other remote learning days. That's not going to be as feasible for elementary students without those parents at home to help facilitate that and support that.
Dr. Smith, if I could, I think the way it's worded, I don't think we can do more than 5 unless we have a declared emergency, unless I'm reading it wrong. So we'll have to get clarification from Deborah. But also, if we move year-round to our traditional calendar for 1 year, then the teachers will not get paid for July. Just a note. I'm not saying we can't do it. It's just the way they're set up for their pay.
Thank you for that.
Dr. Smith, it's just a quick thing about my thought that I think that a regular basis of remote learning will really prepare everybody, even parents at home, for what is coming next years or later on of the year. So I agree with the idea of a regular basis instruction for remote learning, once a week or something.
And I agree. I mean, and I think that's part of why the legislators said that the remote learning days could not occur within the first 5 days of school. So in essence, you couldn't say to folks, "Well, we're just going to start 5 days later than the 17th, and the first 5 days will just be remote learning days." So there is some intentionality about spreading those days throughout the school year. And I think to the best of our ability, if the intentionality we can associate with them in terms of preparation and practice for if we find ourselves having to go remote, I think it's very, very important.
From what I'm hearing from parents, I think a lot of parents are prepared for more remote learning at this point. And I think that there's a lot of fear about starting the school year in August with 20, 25 kids in a classroom altogether.
And thank you, Kim, for that. And I think that's a very real fear that folks have, and we're going to have to be responsive to that. And also, we don't know what the guidance from the CDC in terms of, mass gatherings will be at that time. And that's not addressed here, but that is something that we're going to have to develop a response to as we plan our reentry to school. So if parents are going to be fearful in August about that, then I can definitely see, to Heather's point, how folks might feel in July in response to that as well.
Dr. Smith, Principal Duchar mentioned that with the CDC expecting a spike in the fall, we might benefit as a district from scheduling our remote learning days as early as possible in the school year. If the intention is to be able to transition with relative ease, having those days earlier, if we do have to do something similar in November or December, as we've had to do these past few months, might be a benefit. So I think we should look at where we're scheduling those with the anticipation of perhaps having to go dark again in November or December.
And I think that point is very well taken. And thank you for bringing that out in terms of the comments. I was trying to take a look at the legislation to get a little additional clarification if I could. But just the unknowns, of course, are what the challenge is here, and how to be able to respond to those. Let's see. And Patty shared, and aside from the calendar, maybe we could offer some parent training opportunities on technology platforms, et cetera, at various times to optimize opportunities to attend. This has been heavy in feedback on parents needing someone to teach them how to use technology and navigate remote learning when students learning it in school, and then supporting parents up front as well would be very beneficial. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to see if that's covered in our plan for that we have to submit to the state. Apologize, I do not know those 13 bullets by heart just yet, but I will. So engaging with community partners on services that parents and students can utilize on remote instruction days, including community partners willing to provide free broadband. So it's engaging the community partners to support parents. That is specific in that. And Patty, I would say if we're going to be doing that, then we're going to need to start, we're going to also need to think about how we train and support parents. So I think we will be addressing that as a part of our remote learning plan. So thank you for making that point. Okay, and so Regina says, I love the idea. And Regina, I'm assuming you love the idea of supporting parents in learning. And then the question would be, would high schools be on the same LMS at that time? And I think that's slightly a different conversation than today. But we are looking at, again, building out a remote learning plan so it best serves our children and our families. And I think logically, limiting the number of learning management systems, the number of apps, the number of applications, in resources that families have to learn really does make sense. So I could surely see us doing that. So let's see. Okay. And so, and thank you for that comment, Maria. And so going back to the calendar and questions in regards to the calendar, concerns in regards to the calendar, just as a part of this discussion. And what I'm hearing, definitely support for remote learning occurring early in the semester, but also understanding that there may be the need to hold some days in reserve. If we have to go out, then these become our remote learning days, and then we don't need to have makeup. And then the flexibility that this does allow us. Any additional discussion? Additional discussion in regards to our year rounds. As Mary Hazel said, one consideration there is that, shifting, and I have heard that there are some districts that are going to shift to one uniform calendar, but the impact on our employees, the impact on our families, I know for all of us, what we thought we knew and what our expectations, that has all been shifted. But again, families have made a very intentional choice to choose year round for themselves. And so moving and transitioning away from that, I think, would be a conversation and a discussion that we would have to engage deeply in.
Can I ask a question about when we're talking about year round, are we talking about restart as well? Or
I think that, and this is my opinion, but I think that if we're going to engage in a conversation around year round, I think we would also have to engage in a conversation around restart, with the understanding that we're really talking about a 1-year change. But, no decisions are being made at this point. It's just, are these the conversations that we need to have? And if so, who are the folks that we need to engage in them? Heather asked the question is, let's see, is there not a workaround with teacher pay for year round?
The requirement is at least one work day in July for them to be considered year round. But the problem with that is if they're year round, I believe, I'm not positive, but if they qualify as year round, and we wait that late to start, I don't know that we can meet the new definition of year round. So that's the tricky part.
Based on what is being shared in this document, I would agree with you that we would not.
Right. And so, yeah.
So do we have any flexibility? Because it says 185 days or the 1,025 hours for those days. Does that give us any flexibility whatsoever?
Well, Don, I can share with you conversations that I've had with folks in our RESA, and there is still discussion with folks in our region who believe that what it indicates is that the first 185 days can be met either through days or through hours, but then the additional 5 days has to be 5 days. And we're actually seeking guidance from that from our legal counsel so that we make sure that we get that right.
Yeah, because I'm just concerned about enough days to do training for teachers. And I just didn't know if that give us any flexibility to give us more time to train teachers.
Well, and what this says is that remote learning days can be both instructional days and work days. So it could be that we have teachers who are engaging in remote learning, but also being asked to engage in training.
That's tricky if we're really trying to sort of, hone our skills at remote learning, but I guess it's possible.
I agree. I do not disagree with you, Mary Hazel. I do not. And I think it's tough asking people to toggle between the two.
This is just a very difficult calendar in terms of allowing for professional development opportunities and meeting instructional needs. We'll make it work like we always do, but it's a very difficult calendar to navigate.
Yeah, because I guess my fear is we're going to have this calendar and then we've got this remote learning plan, and because of the calendar, implementing the remote learning plan becomes very, very difficult.
Yeah. If we have the flexibility of the hours, which we're waiting to hear, we gain back work days, which would be helpful, but we don't know yet.
I haven't heard back from Senator Peterson yet. I'm waiting for that. I have spoken to the Chamber of Commerce, the Wrightsville Beach Chamber of Commerce. Their understanding is there is no flexibility that would allow us to do that. And they obviously have a vested interest in more connections than I do. So I'm assuming we just don't have that flexibility.
Question is, are half days an option? I think half days are an option. I think though, when we send students home on half days, they're not our most productive professional development days. And we actually moved away from those in this year's calendar for that simple reason. It's very difficult to teach a half day, then make that transition, and then have meaningful staff development afterwards. But they are an option. Another comment, I think student attendance early on will be an issue. Perhaps the more remote days early on will help with engagement for students who aren't in school. What about use of the first 5 Wednesdays after 8/24 for remote learning? Can clean school after 2 days of face-to-face, then ease the students back into the school? Just a thought. And I think that is something that we need to consider, and I think that will be a part of a larger conversation in terms of what does reentry look like. And, moving students out of the building to give us time to do that deep cleaning on a regular basis really does make sense as well. Could we continue those half days remote learning in the AM, PD, in the PM? Well, and that's what I was talking about in terms of the teacher workday in and of itself being both remote learning and professional development. So I think that's a possibility as well. Now, one thing I haven't heard that was very much front of mind in last year's calendar discussion is it going to be important this year to attempt to align with the university and community college with the university and community college calendar? Is that something that would be important?
I'm not sure the August 17th date applies to those schools, but we need clarification on that as well. I think that was one of the in one of the paragraphs, it listed the innovative school law as, that would still be followed. And that did not have the start date of August 25th or whatever before.
And Sharon, since you put please behind your response, then of course we'll do it.
Hey, I was talking about the part of the aligned with the community college.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't realize it would back right up to what I'd already said.
Look at her using good manners. Of course we're going to do it now.
Principal Ducharme, could you expand on why you think that would be beneficial? Is it just the dual enrolled students? I know that's a large percentage of our student population now, but what are some of the benefits? And Dr. Smith, I know you had some concerns. Maybe we can start a conversation about what that might look like.
Well, I mean, I think this just goes back to what our intentions were when we submitted the first calendar, but with the start date of August the 17th being the earliest that we could start, I don't know that we would get that time in. So I don't even know if it's a realistic request at this point.
Well, and I know that Mr. Bowyer and I had the conversation about at the very least ending the high school semester before we go home in December. But what I would say there is the challenge would, in my mind, would present itself would be that the semesters would be very unbalanced, possibly having maybe 80, 85 days in one semester and, up to 100 in another. So that would be a huge imbalance in terms of the semesters, just to be able to end before we went home in December. I think that if there was the opportunity to truly align very strongly with the community college calendar, then the reward of that might make it a little bit more palatable, but would definitely seek the responses from high school teachers, high school principals, and parents of high school students in terms of that. And then also, Mary Hazel, I think you kind of alluded to this. We don't know what the community college calendar is going to look like. They may make some alterations in their start dates just for this 1 year. So there may be the possibility of some greater alignment because they may not operate on a traditional calendar or one that we've known to be typical for them in the past. So there are still a lot of questions there. All right. So just wanted to ask the question and just double check to see if Ms. Stagner was able to join the call. Because I know I've got a couple of numbers that don't have names next to them. Okay, so I'm assuming Ms. Stagner's has not joined the call. But what we can do is definitely take the questions that come and elevate those to make sure that we have responses for those. And so I guess at this point, any additional discussion, questions? Can you mute, Sherry, that number? Thanks. So any additional questions, actually, well, not questions, but any additional discussion or okay. So then I think where we are right now would be, what are the questions we need to answer? So based on our discussion today, what are the questions that we need to get answers to?
Well, certainly the location of those remote learning days.
And if you now definitely, if you can share out, I think that would be good for the whole group. But if you do place your question in the chat, we will print the chat and email that to the entire group so that you have that as well. But as you said, Mr. Bull, your placement of remote learning days.
Yep.
Okay, so we do have Ms. Stagner on the call.
I apologize. I went to the Google Meet site and was waiting to be let in on that one. So.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay.
So we've had a conversation and discussion today, and definitely, Mr. Beaulieu, if you'd like to kind of pose those questions, please do so. And so we had still some questions that maybe you could provide us some guidance with in terms of the legislation. One specifically of whether or not it's a hard and fast 190, or is it that the first 185 days could be met with either 185 days or the 1,025 hours, and then after you meet that requirement, then you add the additional 5 days, and then I think another question was around, is it 5 remote days that could be added solely, and if we went beyond those 5 days, would it only have that only occur if there was a declaration of a disaster?
Okay. My reading of it, and again, this is our first experience with this and trying to work through it. But my reading of it is that the first 185 days can be met with reference to the hour requirement. But there have to be 5 separate and distinct instructional days. So that would come to the 190. Again, that's based on less than clear drafting of the statute. I think that is the best interpretation at this point.
Okay, so we could meet the 185 through hours. Just for example, we're meeting the 185 in this year's calendar through 182 school days, but those school days are long enough in duration that we are exceeding the 1,025 required hours. So if I understand you correctly, we could again do that next year, build in 183 days in our calendar, meet the long as those days are long enough, meet the 1,025 hours, and then in addition to, we add 5 days beyond that, 5 full days beyond that.
5 full days, and the statute does not define how many hours you have to have in a remote instructional day. But I do think that there needs to be some, reasonable length of the remote instructional day. And again, that is going to be included in your plan. I can turn my camera on so I'm not a disembodied voice. No, okay, my camera's not working. So I do think that if you address in the remote instructional plan what your remote instructional day is going to look like, you do have some flexibility in that because the statute or the term isn't defined specifically about how many hours that has to be. I would note also you do need to keep in mind the 215 days for the calendar. That hasn't changed. and also the 42 days for teachers, the uninterrupted 42 days, unless it's a year-round or modified calendar school.
So when you say uninterrupted 42 days, could you talk a little bit more about that?
Okay, that's in 115C 84. The calendar must include at least 42 consecutive days when teacher attendance is not required, unless it's a year-round or.
Okay.
So I don't think there's anything in the new law that eliminates that requirement.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Deborah, can I ask, is it your understanding that the innovative high schools and year-round also have the extra 5 days or not?
Yes, they will. The only, okay, I'm going to pull up so that I have all my notes in different places here. It is my understanding or my interpretation that the only requirements that do not apply to the innovative high schools and the restart schools in the new legislation are the opening and closing dates. So there's still the flexibility on those. Those do not apply, but the other provisions do. So the 190 days, the 5 instructional remote days.
One of the things that we discussed was pushing, back the start date for year-round, but still trying to meet the more clarified definition of what a year-round school is in the new legislation.
Well, so there are some, there's some guidance on the instructional day starting dates, I believe. Let me see. Oh, no, the remote instructional days can't be scheduled within certain timeframes of the year-round school starting.
There's a question, Ms. Stagner, about somehow pushing or just hitting the pause button on year-round schools for 1 year, as it doesn't look all that likely that they'll be able to start on time. And there's concerns that if we have to get shut down again, there's logistical issues with having so many different calendars. So there seems to be a desire to explore the possibility of having a single common calendar, if I'm reading that right, for 1 year. But is that legally possible?
So I don't think there's anything that would prohibit, in the statute or existing law that would prohibit the district from just adopting a more unitary calendar for all schools and eliminating the year-round schools. Now, as a practical matter, whether you'll be able to sort of restart that process of having year-round schools going forward, it may be more challenging. And just for practical respects, and then also although the year-round school definition is in this law limited to the 2021 school year, I would not be surprised if it is not adopted and carried forward on a more permanent basis. So that in the past, we have not had a definition of year-round school, but this one may well become the permanent definition. And that modified calendar schools, I don't know if New Hanover has any of those, but if a modified calendar school does not continuously remain a modified calendar and continue to operate that way, I think they lose that grandfathered status. That's my interpretation at this point.
So it's possible that it's certainly possible that if we were to adopt a common calendar, that we couldn't restart those schools as year-round schools very easily?
Well, I don't know what the practical obstacles might be in moving back and forth from a year-round to a traditional and then back to a year-round. It just might pose some challenges as a practical matter rather than as a legal matter. And you have to, I think, keep in mind at least the possibility that this new year-round definition will continue to remain in effect past 2021.
Okay, thank you.
So people that are smarter than me and putting together the actual on-the-ground calendar, it may be challenging to fit in a switch back and forth like that.
Thank you.
Sure. And I'm sorry, Dr. Smith, did you have a second question for me?
No, you answered both. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any Restart schools in the district?
We have 2.
Okay. So I do believe, because they are, they follow the same sort of exemptions that charter schools do, and charter schools are specifically addressed in the, you know, as an exemption. So I think whatever is in place for the flexibility for a cooperative innovative school, you'd have that same flexibility for the Restart schools as far as the start and end date. The additional remote learning days are going to have to be included.
Thank you very much. Any other questions that for today? I know we're on the section where we're trying to gather the questions that we need to answer, that we need to bring back to you. You know, what is the research that we need to do around calendar, so that we can put ourselves in the position of drafting the calendar that we would then bring to the board no later than the board meeting, the July board meeting.
Dr. Smith, my only concern is if we wait till then, the decision on year-round, and we have to make that decision sooner, because it would be starting immediately, and there's just a lot to, if we didn't change their calendar.
So then again, no later than July, but we surely could go earlier than July.
And I guess you could do it in 2 pieces.
Yes.
Just trying to figure out the logistics of that.
When does your year-round school open now? When would it open?
So Heather, can you give me the and we have one of the principals on this Zoom session. Heather, can you give me the first day for teachers?
I believe it's the 9th or 10th. I'd have to look it up, LaShawn.
Okay.
I will do that. I will do that right now though while we're talking. Okay.
All right. All right.
I apologize.
Oh no,
Thank you.
you're fine. And I knew it was around the 14th for children.
Yeah.
Because of course my child attends a year round.
July?
Yes, July. And so we would be pushing that back at the very least a week early. You know, 5 instructional days early.
I'm showing it's July 9th. It's the first teacher undesignated workday.
July 9th. And so if we went 5 days earlier than that, Jeannie, because I don't know, you know, if we're starting on the Wednesday or Tuesday, what would be that first start date for teachers if we went 5 days, 5 not calendar, but 5 work days earlier?
It would be July 1st because the 3rd
July
is
1st.
holiday.
Yeah.
July 1st. Okay.
And then the 4th is a holiday, I get, I'm assuming still.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Jeannie. So you're exactly right, Mary Hazel. If we were going to make a different decision, you know, well, any decision on year round would have to come prior to July. So thank you for making that point.
Have you put in place or talking about a way to get input from, I'm sure from principals, but also from families and the community about changing the, moving away from a year round?
So this is our first calendar committee meeting, of course, since the legislation, and we haven't spoken specifically about that as a part of this discussion. But the things that we've done in the past, we have surveyed folks, and you know, we get a very strong response, typically. And
Visceral.
Heather, you can, okay, I was not going to use that word, but Heather, you can surely speak to, the type of response rate you get from your families when we talk about calendar and we use the, even just the electronic survey method to gauge their input.
Yes, I would agree. However, I do think with the times being the way that they are and the concern with children coming back into the building and what that's going to look like for our families and the uncertainty of what it's going to look like, I think that this may be a year where the parents would understand that it's better to be safe and to start in August, as opposed to say we're going to start in July and then really not knowing what the virus is going to do in the next several months. As we all know, it's day to day. So, and then if we have to start, is it going to be all remote? That's what my teachers are asking is if we start, say, July 1, but then we're really not supposed to be in schools safely until a normal August startup for regular traditional schools, are we going to be doing remote for about a month? And, that brings a whole nother set of concerns for us when we've got kindergartners coming in that we've never seen. We don't know their families, trying to get them involved in this remote learning, maybe for the first time and what that might look like. So I do agree with you, Dr. Smith, that our year-round parents are very vocal, and I don't want that year-round schedule to end indefinitely. But I do think that we're in some tough times for all schools right now, and we may have to make some tough decisions for our not only the students, but our community and our teachers.
Oh, I agree very much so. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I mean, if that is, I would love to poll the 86 people in here. Seems to grow by the minute, and find out where the committee is. If that's something that we're seriously discussing. Again, Mary Hazel, maybe I don't know exactly how the money piece would work, how salaries would work. That's something that we'd have to consider quickly, and we'd definitely have to start reaching out immediately to those families. And again, I don't know what the appetite
of a month of pay for. I mean, they would still get paid their same salary next year. It would just be paid over August through May instead of July through June.
Okay. Yeah, that would be a heavy lift in a month, but again, these are unprecedented times. Ms. Byers is correct on that.
And employees deal with it when they go back, when they switch schools between traditional and year-round, and sometimes it's in their favor and sometimes it's not. But the following year when we came back, they double up, but it'd be difficult.
So if somebody could do this, if somebody could email me to take back to the board members the benefits of delaying the year-round, if that's the appetite that people have. Because it will be a tough sell, and I'll need some really good talking points on why this is a benefit.
So, Mr. Bowyer, when you mean delaying the year round, you mean maintaining their current calendar?
No, I mean adopting a common calendar.
Okay, adopting again. So the benefits of adopting a current calendar. Okay.
A common calendar for 1 year.
I would say, I think, Heather spoke very well to this.
I agree.
Just really for no other reason than just the concerns about the early reentry.
Right.
Having folks enter your building July 1 as opposed to, maybe August 14th.
Right. If you look at the governor's phased in guidance, you're looking at some sort of return to normal if there's not a spike at the end of June. And, that's really getting close. So I could see maybe August 14th if people were, I could see that.
And then also, if we had to delay, then we could delay as a system on August 14th as opposed to,
Piecemeal.
Yes, yes. So
Heather, if you could type that up for me, exactly what you just said, or as close as possible, and that'd be very helpful.
All right.
This is Patty. I was just going to say too, based on some of the things we've been experiencing and seeing, that I also think there's a potential impact for greatly improved attendance if not trying to come back so early, because of not just the students or high risk family members that students may be going back and forth from home to, but also the population of students that we actually have with medical conditions and other situations where parents are probably exponentially concerned about sending their students back. So that would be another big piece, I believe. And then situations with childcares and daycares, and when they will be back operational so the situation of teachers and school employees that wouldn't be able to work if they don't have any type of childcare for their own families. I just wanted to throw those two out there as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes. Okay, so are there other questions that we need to lift up either today or bring back responses to? What is the research that needs to be done?
Well, I think we need to start putting together some different calendar options. I assume, Dr. Smith, that the focus will be on 185 days met through hours and then adding those, because that does give us a little bit more flexibility. That would be my preference. 190 days through actual instructional days is a real heavy lift. So I'm glad to hear that those first 185 can be met through the hours.
So I think you make a great transition to, what are our next steps? And so I think our next step would be to draft a calendar that I think supports and is responsive, as we said in the beginning, to student learning, but also is responsive to the professional development needs of our teachers. We have found that student achievement is more greatly impacted by the quality of the instruction that students receive. So that direct correlation, and we of course have high quality teachers, high quality instruction, but when teachers receive that very intentional training to be responsive to the children who show up in their classroom, children do better academically. So being able to be responsive to the professional development needs of the teachers as well as the instructional needs of the students, I think it's going to be critical. So designing a calendar that supports that. And I think we can do that now that we've gotten the guidance that we do have some flexibility around the first 185 and meeting that through hours and not just simply through days. And then what I probably would like to do is maybe put together a brief survey for the committee to just really find out where people fall in terms of preference. Do we want to see the remote learning days spread throughout the year? Or more so, do we want to see them front loaded? Or is it that we want to possibly see them strategically implemented, close to our semester breaks? So I'm really interested in where we fall out. And so what I'll do is draft a brief survey for the committee in regards to that. And I apologize for the feedback that I'm hearing. Is everyone hearing that feedback? Might just be me.
I hear it, but it may be that people don't, if you're muted, it might help some of the echoing.
I'm muted, but I do hear it, LaShawn, but it's bearable.
Okay, all right. It's just like the voices in my head, so.
And Dr. Smith, I apologize if you've already covered this before I jumped on, but there is the option to sort of have days, remote instructional days, do double duty with teacher work days, as long as there's been remote instruction prepared for the students ahead of time. It's so that sort of asynchronous learning when the teacher is not actually having to be there at the same time. So that gives you some additional, flexibility, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be critical as a part of this plan. So I appreciate you lifting that up. Okay. So what I hear in terms of our most immediate next steps are, really finding out where we fall out in terms of our preference for where the remote learning days position themselves. Also, putting together draft calendars. I think we also need to get some direction around year round, whether we're going to try to move forward with a common calendar for the district for our year round. And I'm going to include in that our restart schools, or we're going to maintain the calendars that we have. What else are our most immediate next steps?
Dr. Smith, I think, given the conversation around year-round, it's important to meet quickly, probably next week, because if that is the direction we are going to take, I really want to have that communication piece with the parents as soon as possible.
Yeah. I think communication, of course, frequent, transparent, and engaging all the stakeholders that we can have be a part of that discussion. So I agree with you. Any other most immediate next steps? And of course, we want to be very diligent and intentional in our steps moving forward. I'm a part of the large district consortium in terms of a chief academic officer, and also participate in the chief academic officer group for our RESAs. So I'll be having the conversations with those folks, and very much will bring back that information that I gauge. I would also encourage you to go ahead and start reaching out to your stakeholder groups and having these conversations as well. And you need not wait until our next meeting to share that information back with Mr. Beaulieu, or myself. So please feel free to reach out to us. I would also say, if there are questions in the interim, please let us know what those questions are so that we can be as responsive as possible. And I agree with you, Mr. Beaulieu, that we need to schedule another meeting for next week with this. So we need to move as quickly as we can, get as much work done in the short term, so that we have the opportunity to move in an incremental way. So I don't think we need to fast forward to our final decision or our final recommendation next week, but I think we do need to make sure that we're making forward progress in terms of um, everything that needs to be considered, all the questions that need to be answered, and putting in front of you some draft calendars for your consideration. With that, yes.
I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
No, you're great.
Can you also put on there for next week's meeting, or maybe in a email before then, a breakdown of days versus hours as far as meeting the criteria for DVI? What that looks like.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else that we might be missing? Because even though I've done calendar, I want to say for the last 5 years, this is brand new. Mr. Bowyer?
No, I think we covered everything.
Okay. So if there's no additional questions, discussion, I do not want to cut anyone off. Mr. Bowyer, I'll ask if you would not mind closing.
Sure. I thank everybody for your work. It's funny. I was placed on the calendar committee. I thought I'd be bored to tears. And the first year we tried to change everything, and the house came down, and now the house came down, and we have to change everything. So I appreciate all the fun you guys keep throwing our way, or they keep throwing our way, or nature throws our way. But you guys are doing a great job already, and I think we will come up with something that meets the needs of our faculty and our students. So thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you so very much. We will save the chat and share that with everyone. I think there are some questions that were posed that we did not share out, so we want to make sure that you have that. And I agree. Thank you very much for your time. And we'll leave the meeting up for just a few minutes in case there are any last questions that you want to post in the chat, or any questions that you have for us. But I will say now, Mr. Bowyer, we are now, meeting is adjourned. I'll take the head nod as a yes. Okay. All right.
Meeting adjourned.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you
you,
very
everyone.
much.